So without any further ado, thank you very much, all of the participants, for being here. And most importantly, thank you, Pamela, for being here. I'll hand it over to you now.
Great. Thank you, Vera. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today, whether you're joining us live or this recording will be made available. So some of you may be listening to the recorded version. But we are here to spend the next hour focusing on, as the slide says, your next career move, right? So you are working on certification, working on developing your skills and experience and qualifications. And now the next step is going to be to leverage all of that into the next chapter of your career. So we are going to cover quite a lot. I tried to squeeze a lot into this webinar because I know your time is valuable. And I'm also going to direct you, because we're covering a lot, we're not going to go super deep in some areas, but I will direct you where to go next within Big Interview if you want to continue working on some of these topics that we talk about. I also just want to reference Summer. Summer is here to help me with moderating questions and comments. So as Vera said, please feel free to submit questions or anything that you want to talk about. We will be addressing some questions as they come up potentially, but probably what I'm going to do is move through each of the sections and then pause. There's some exercises in each of the sections, so we're going to pause there, and that'll give me a chance then to take a look and see what questions have come in on the content so far, and then we can address questions at each step along the way. And then, of course, at the end, we will also have time for any other questions that come up related to what we specifically cover on the webinar, as well as anything else that's, that you need to talk about related to your job search and your career direction. So that's it. Let's dive into the slides. Okay, so that's me, obviously, just a little bit of my background if you haven't had a chance to use Big Interview yet. That's a platform that was built really on the basis of my experience as a career coach, more than 10 years now, and I've worked with clients ranging everything from new grads to CEOs to surgeons, and I've also had a lot of experience on the other side of the interview table as both a hiring manager and a human resources consultant. So everything that I'm telling you today is based on both sides of that experience, what I've seen work for my clients in terms of getting jobs, doing well in interviews and the hiring process, as well as my understanding of what they're really thinking of, the interviewers and the hiring managers during this process when they decide who they're going to hire for that dream job that you're looking at. So that's a little bit of that background. And that's a little bit of what Big Interview looks like. If you haven't used it yet, you do have access to Big Interview through Coursera, through your participation in Coursera. So please go check it out if you haven't already. What you see on the screen here, and we also see sort of the mobile version and what that looks like, but what you're seeing in the main screen there is what our practice interview tool looks like. So we do have video lessons on all the different aspects of the resume and interview process, best practices. We have a question library, we have sample answers, we have tools to help you build your answers, and then this is our practice interview tool where you can go in, get a little bit of practice, record yourself, even share that recording with a mentor or someone else for feedback. So I'm going to speak to some of the different features and areas within Big Interview as we go along and talk about some of the different topics, but just wanted to tee that up, that is a resource that's available to you after this webinar and ongoing as you continue in the job search process. Okay, so getting into what you're thinking about here, it's about taking your career to the next level. So a professional certificate, you've been doing a lot of work, you've been learning a lot, you've been gaining some hands-on experience, and all of that means that you now have access to a whole new world of career opportunities. So for some people, that means making a fairly significant career change, right? Maybe you're shifting from a previous career to focusing more on your area of specialization. In other cases, you may just be adding a certificate to your experience and perhaps getting ready for the next level of seniority or a different, more challenging role. So whatever the case, your certification does open up opportunities, and to seize those opportunities, you have to be prepared to show them off and to show why you're qualified for that next level in your career. And so that's what we're here to talk about. And that applies to a couple of different areas. And what we're going to focus on here today is the resume, the cover letter a little bit, more so the resume and the job interview, the skills that you need to make sure that you're positioning yourself as the current and enhanced you, right, in terms of your qualifications, and making sure that you're positioning yourself at the right level for the jobs that you want, and not getting stuck at something that's not quite as challenging or fulfilling as what you would like. All right, so that's what we're going to talk about. How are we going to now refresh your resume, your cover letter template, and your interview skills to make sure that you are positioning yourself in the right way? Okay, so first thing we're going to dive into is talking about the resume. So as I mentioned, and anyone who's kind of jumping in now and maybe missed the introduction, just wanted to encourage everyone, please do submit questions. Summer is going to be keeping on top of questions, and we're going to be pausing at different points and addressing questions that, that come up here. So this first section, we're going to be talking about refreshing that resume. And when we get through the recommendations on the resume itself, we'll get to a little exercise, and at that point I will also pause and kind of go through the questions and see what questions people have submitted that we might want to address on the topic of the resume. And if you have questions on other topics, please feel free to also submit those. We will get to those as we go along. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about in terms of refreshing your resume is that summary statement. So some of you may already have a summary statement on your resume. If you don't, I would strongly encourage you to look at that. And we do have entire lessons in the Big Interview curriculum dedicated to what is a summary statement, why should you have it, how do you write a good one. Lots of examples in there in addition to the one that's here on the slide. So the summary statement is really just an area at the top of your resume, so prime real estate, that's exactly where they're looking first, that really distills what's most relevant and compelling about you and your background, right? And so it's great. That's the first thing they see, and so you can then hook them right away with the most relevant information, and it's something that you can customize for different jobs. So if you happen to be looking down a couple of different paths, you can have different versions of your resume that focus on different things in that summary statement. Summary statement is also a great place to incorporate keywords and keyword phrases. As many of you know, a lot of companies, especially big companies, use resume screening tools, applicant tracking systems that allow them to basically search all the incoming resumes and cover letters for keywords and filter out the ones that don't match. So this allows you to look at the job descriptions and the job requirements, and this is a great place, along with others that we'll touch on as we go along. There are other places as well to incorporate some of those keywords to make sure that your resume is matching with the jobs that you're applying for. Okay, so the example here is for someone in the data science field. So summary, this might be titled, the section might be titled professional summary or just summary. Experienced data scientist with IBM certification and focus on machine learning, skilled at problem solving and predictive analytics, adept at collaboration and learning new methods quickly. And so just an example here. So this might be, for example, related to a position that's prioritizing machine learning. Maybe it's something that's looking at predictive analytics as another keyword phrase. And what might follow this might be some bullet points with some additional skills, or a place to highlight certifications, or just sort of highlights, career highlights. Or for someone early in their career, it could be as simple as a couple of lines like this. So if you really want to dig into the ins and outs of the resume summary statement, I really encourage that lesson within Big Interview to get a sense of all the different forms it can take. But it's something that I think, especially for career changers, is really useful. I think for everyone, but if you're a career changer and the last job, or the last, if you're starting your resume with your recent experience or your education, if that doesn't obviously pertain to what you want to do next, that's where you really risk being passed over, and where adding a summary statement can help them to immediately see, oh, okay, I get it. This is a match for this position. Okay. So that is the summary statement. I'm just going to walk through a couple of steps here related to refreshing that resume to better present your certification and any other new experience and skills that you've been working on to gain over recent times since you last updated that resume. I know we all put off updating the resume until we really need to. So encouraging you to start thinking now so that you're not staying up late the night before when you're ready to apply for that dream job that shows up. Okay. That's a summary statement. And then, of course, you want to add your certification, the description of your certification to the resume. So you could consider a separate section for just certifications, especially if you have more than one. You could include it under education. There's a lot of different ways to do this. This could be something if it's very recent and you feel like it's a real distinguishing aspect of your background, maybe you would include a description of it in that summary section. But you want to include it and ideally describe it using keywords. And if you have capstone projects or other relevant projects that were part of your certification, that could be something to add as well. And that's especially if maybe you don't have a whole lot of hands-on experience in the field that your certification is in. So that work that you've done on projects during your education is going to be even more valuable to show that you get it, right? That you have an understanding of the day-to-day work and that you have some experience with that if you haven't done it as part of a previous job. Okay, and then step 3, create or update your skills section. So you should probably have a skills section, especially if you're in any sort of technical field or technical related field, because often it's very important to see what programming languages, what technology you're familiar with, certifications. This could also be a good place to include soft skills. You can have a blend of soft skills here as well, especially if you have skills like management, things that are very relevant to the job description. So it's not just about the technical side of things. And the good thing about this skills list is this is also a place where you can customize for each job. So you can include, you know, maybe there's a particular technology that you have a little bit of experience in. Maybe you wouldn't normally include it in your resume, but there's a job where they say that would be a plus. So yeah, put it in the list, right? You can customize this a bit for the job requirements. And this is also a place where you can look at including those keywords to help you get past not just the human screener, but the robot automated resume screeners. Okay, that's the skills section. And then in general, looking for other places to incorporate those keywords, getting past those screeners. And so in addition to the things we've talked about, the summary, the skills list, go back to those position descriptions in your resume or even your education description, any place where you can see an opportunity to describe what you did, your responsibilities, using those same words, the same terminology that's used in the job description. That's really going to increase your chances. And it might also help to spark your thinking. I find that way too many people, most people have not been trained in the art of resume writing, right? So you've seen resumes, you kind of have a sense of what's supposed to be in there, and what ends up happening is people fall back on just sort of listing out all the things that were in sort of the job description, right? Answer phones, update database, so instead of having something that's actually interesting and compelling and shows that not only did you do the job, but you did it well. So having to put some of those keywords in can help to spark that and push you toward perhaps being a little bit more results oriented in those position descriptions. And again, we have lessons on Big Interview all about the best practices in resumes. So I really suggest if you haven't updated your resume in a while, or maybe you have, but you've just never really had any training on the best way or recent training on the best way to position yourself with your resume, definitely recommend checking that out. And we also have a resume builder tool on Big Interview. So once you kind of have a feel for best practices and how to do it, that tool, the resume builder, will walk you through putting it all together into a nice shiny new resume featuring your most recent accomplishments. Okay, yep. So that's the last piece on resumes, and I'm just going to touch on cover letters for a minute before we pause and address questions? Okay, so the cover letter, there is some debate out there about how important the cover letter is, and I would say that part of the reason for that is because it's important sometimes and it's not so important other times. I do suggest that everyone should have a go-to cover letter template that can then be customized for each different role. It doesn't have to be groundbreaking. It doesn't have to be, the greatest thing ever written, because the truth is that a lot of positions, they don't necessarily read it. But there are enough companies that do take a look at that cover letter before moving on to the resume, or at least read it at some point and form part of their impression of you based on that cover letter. So putting something together, and once again, we do have a lesson on this if you want to see some examples and to kind of feel free to borrow language and use it for your own cover letters. But ideally, you want it to be concise. Let's be real. Even if they're reading the cover letters, they're going to read the first few lines. If it doesn't grab them, and even if it does, they're going to skim ahead. They're maybe going to be like, okay, fine, moving on, right? So hopefully, okay, fine, moving on to actually looking at your resume and considering bringing you in for an interview. So that's why those first few lines should be engaging, right? And why you should be as concise as you can be. Not a lot of buildup, not a lot of fluff. It should be customized for the role. And really what you're trying to do in the cover letter is summarize your fit and your interest. And of course, we need to proofread and make sure that it is error-free. So if you do want to see a couple of examples of cover letters, you can check those out in Big Interview. It's one of those things that you should have, and having a good one can definitely help you get in the door in some cases. Okay, so that brings us here. So this is an exercise. Given our limited time together here, I know that you're not going to have the time. We're going to take a few minutes. What I'd like you to do is start to think about, if you don't have a professional summary on your resume right now, or even if you do, but it doesn't represent who you are currently, or you at your best necessarily, take a few moments to jot down some notes. What might you include in that professional summary? Or maybe even in the skills list. Just jotting down a few notes in terms of what we've covered so far about resumes and cover letters that you can then go and apply to your own resume and cover letters. And so while you're thinking of that, Summer, I just want to ask you if anyone has submitted questions related to what we've covered so far about resumes and cover letters, or if you haven't yet, but you have one, go ahead and submit it now, and we can address anything that's on your mind related to this topic.
Yeah, Pam. So we actually had a question come through, and the question is, what can I do if I'm not getting responses when I apply?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is, of course, one of the biggest challenges that we see, and one of the reasons why the resume is so important. Yeah, you can be putting your resume out there and not getting replies, and then you can have the most amazing interview skills possible, and still it doesn't matter if you're not getting a chance to go in there and interview. So if you feel like you are applying and not getting responses, that means that it's time to rethink that resume and the cover letter. And if you haven't applied the best practices that we've just covered, really taking some time to do that and try to rethink that resume, because it may be that your resume is outdated, or it may be that you're not being as clear as you could be about your goals and your transferable skills. This is particularly true if you're making any kind of career change or career shift. Often people end up just taking their old resume, kind of putting it out there, and then maybe in the cover letter they go into a lot of detail about why they're making the change and why they have transferable skills. But it's a harder mission to get out there and get that first opportunity in a new field. And oftentimes those gatekeepers, they don't take the time to really look. They skim over, they keep going, and they just assume, hey, this got here by mistake. This person is not a fit for this role. So whatever you can do to make sure that you're positioning yourself for the new role in the resume, not just the cover letter, is important. And of course, networking is key for this. And getting a little bit creative as you start to navigate this job search process.
Perfect, thank you. We do have one other question that came through as well. This question is, what do you think is the ideal length of the summary statement?
Good question. Yeah, that's a great question. So in terms of ideal length, from my perspective, that's going to vary based on your level of experience and, you know, and the field that you're in. So more senior level people tend to have longer summary sections. And I think the same is true if you have sort of an unorthodox background. Maybe you've made a career change in the past, or you've just had some different roles that maybe would be confusing from just looking at your resume progression alone, and the summary section provides an opportunity to kind of explain it. And especially if you have great experience that's further down in the resume. As we all know, people start to read and they may not make it down that far. So being able to incorporate some of that higher up can be of great benefit. Maybe if you've been doing something else and you're trying to go back to something you did in the past. So I guess the answer here would be probably a couple of lines is what you want to aim for if you're a new grad, or if you're someone who's got a very logical progression from the last thing that you did. But if you're more senior level, or if you are making a career change or doing something a little bit different, that's where you can often benefit from a little bit more. And again, not a ton. Ideally, we want the resume to stay in the 1 to 2 page range. And again, that is going to depend on how long you've been working and how much information you have. So you do want to keep it concise, but I could see having a couple of lines in a paragraph form and then a couple of bullet points as part of that summary section if you do really want to emphasize that as the first thing for them to look at. Okay, great. So feel free to post. If you have follow-up questions on any of these, feel free to post. For the sake of time, unless someone says there's another burning question, I'm going to keep moving, and we are going to reserve some time at the end to catch up on additional questions too.
No other questions at this point, Pam.
Okay, perfect. All right, good. Then we're right on pace here. So this is the next steps. So before we move on from our resume topic, I just wanted to point you to these next steps. So obviously we asked you to start jotting down some notes. That's not enough time to fully explore and develop these new changes that you want to make to your resume. So please go check out our resume builder tool on Big Interview. You'll also see resume curriculum, the lessons that I referred to earlier. We have separate lessons on the summary statement, formatting, getting past those automated screeners, special tips for career changers, all kinds of video lessons in there, and then the resume builder as well. So check those out if you want to continue to learn a little bit more as you start to apply all of this to your own brand new resume and cover letter. Okay, so the other thing I want to talk about is your interview skills, because we're assuming that you're going to get out there with that new resume and those new skills and all of the other strengths that you bring to the table, and you're going to start lining up these interviews. So this is where you really can close the deal, right? So the resume is one thing, gets you in the door, gets you past the gatekeepers. The interview is where you really get to talk to the decision makers and position yourself, convince them you're the right person for the job. So especially if you're now trying to position yourself for jobs that may be a little bit more senior or a little bit more challenging or just different than what you've positioned yourself for in the past, it's really important to revisit those interview skills. Even if you feel like you're great at interviewing already, and there are a few people out there who feel that way, but I think a lot of people, probably more so, don't interview all that often, they get rusty, or they just never felt super comfortable with it. So whatever the case for you, now is a great time to revisit your interview skills and make sure that you're able to put that best foot forward as you get out there interviewing for your next role. Okay, so in general, just overall presentation or preparation, that is, and again, Big Interview, the bulk of Big Interview is about preparing you for job interviews. So we have lessons on all of the topics you might want. And if you want more information on what's available and where to go within Big Interview, if you started to check it out already, we can talk about that. You can post questions. But in general, the two main phases here are preparation, right? So analyzing the job description, the types of job descriptions that you're looking at, trying to anticipate the most likely questions that they're going to ask, preparing those speaking points for those key questions. Again, not scripting them, but preparing, thinking about how you want to present yourself, and then the practice piece of it. So Big Interview will guide you through both of these and all of those common questions that we struggle with. Given the amount of time that we have today, I'm really going to touch on, and in a little bit of depth, on two of the most important aspects of the interview to prepare for and practice for. And I say most important, this is based on years of experience, hundreds and hundreds of coaching clients, from all different levels of experience and qualifications, from all different countries and cities and industries. And there's a lot of themes across there in terms of where people are making mistakes that cost them the job offer, and where improvements really make the most difference. So I would say almost all, if not all, of my coaching clients get the homework to work on these two areas that we're going to be talking about with you here today. So the first of that, well, first actually we're going to talk about analyzing the job description to inform preparing for those two aspects of the job description. Right, so that's an important point, and it's something I wanted to call out a little bit related to where you are. Those of you who are here with us today are looking at positioning yourself for a new type of job, a new type of position, and so we want to make sure that you're really analyzing those job descriptions, not just taking your old resume, trying to kind of shine it up a little bit and put it out the door, but really looking at that, looking at what the qualifications are, looking for the job responsibilities that are listed and highlighted and emphasized, and then using that to understand what are my strengths and weaknesses as they relate to this job, right? Maybe I am a career changer. Maybe I don't have as many years of experience in X as they're asking for, but I do have these other great things that I feel would more than make up for that. And I just have to be prepared to talk about it and to also counter any concerns that they might have about perceived weaknesses. And so some of the ways to do that, some of the areas where that's going to make the biggest difference have to do with these areas of the interview. And of course, there's a lot of different questions that they can ask. We're going to spend most of the time today talking about tell me about yourself and talking about your strengths. Right, so these are very important areas of the interview to really be able to shine. And of course, you also have to be able to talk about why this opportunity, especially if you're making a bit of a shift or a career change and it's not obvious, why you would be interested in the opportunity you're interviewing for, or why you would be a great fit for that role. And then behavioral stories, answers for those tell me about a time questions. So again, we have limited time. We can't get into all of them. Happy to take questions and direct you to where in Big Interview you can go to dive deeper into these and other aspects of your interview prep. But for now, we're going to focus first on that tell me about yourself, right? So a lot of people hate this question. It's so open-ended and it's overwhelming to a lot of people. People struggle. I would say in my coaching sessions, a lot of times the first answer in a practice interview to this question is, well, what do you want to know? I'm not really sure. People struggle a little bit, but this is, or some variation on it is, the first question in pretty much all job interviews. And so it's predictable. You know that you're going to have to tell your story in this form. So it's something that you can prepare for. You know it's going to be worth your time to prepare for this. Because if you do this well, you're going to start the interview strong, and it's also going to help with those nerves. A lot of those nerves are around, what are they going to ask? I don't know how it's going to go. I'm not familiar with this format. And so knowing that first answer, that you're going to hit it out of the park because you've really prepared, it does a lot for nerves. It does a lot for your confidence. So thinking about this question, why do they ask it? Well, the interviews, from the interviewer's perspective, it's an easy way to get the conversation flowing, right? A lot of times they've got your resume, maybe they haven't looked at it, maybe they've skimmed it, but this is a good way to just throw the ball into your court and get the conversation started, right? So for them, it's that's what they're thinking. What they'd like for you to do is give them a nice, concise answer that sums up who you are, why you're a fit for the job, so that they can then follow up with the most relevant questions for learning more, asking for more information on different aspects of your experience. Okay, so some of the variations here, of course, the classic tell me about yourself, tell me a bit about your background, walk me through your resume, right? These are all variations on the big open-ended balls in your court question that is at the beginning of most interviews. So how do you answer this? Right? Well, you first of all embrace the question. Okay, this allows you, if you prepare for it and if you know what you're doing here, you can set the tone of the whole interview, right? It allows you to lead with your strongest selling points. It even allows you to start strong, maybe even countering objections that they might have, but creating that great first impression, which of course is going to build momentum for the rest of the interview. So see this as an opportunity and not something to dread. Once you do the prep work here, you will see this as an opportunity. Right? What are some of the things people do? The breathless resume monologue, starting at the very beginning, and this is especially deadly if you're further on in your career and you have a lot of years to talk about, and you start back with your school experience and you walk all the way forward. By the time you get to the best stuff, you've probably lost them, right? The first date approach, the story of your life, too much personal stuff, not enough focus on the professional and kind of leading with what's most relevant. More small talk kind of approach is not going to help you start as strong. So what should you do? Well, this is basically your elevator pitch for the job. This is your elevator pitch for why should you pick me for this job. So it's a short summary of, your value proposition, right? Why should I hire this person? And we're looking at about a 1 to 2 minute answer here. So this should include your top selling points for the position. It should come across as natural, not scripted. This is really important. And 1 to 2 minutes, so it has to be concise. It's a lot to try to accomplish in those moments, especially if you're nervous. And almost all of us are nervous in an interview. So that's why I highly recommend preparing in advance using this 3-part model. I've been using this 3-part model with all of my coaching clients, and it's been part of our curriculum on Big Interview for many, many years. And it's a great way to save time, cut to the chase, really kind of put together a concise but relevant overview of what you're all about for the purposes of the beginning of the interview. So the 3-part model, I like to think of it as who I am, why I'm qualified, that's the expertise highlights bit, and then why I'm here. Right, so 3 parts really. We're going to talk about each of those parts a little bit so you can see it. And once again, I will direct you. We do have entire lessons on the Tell Me About Yourself response, the 3-part model, and it includes video recordings of sample answers to help you kind of see it in action. We're going to share some examples here a little bit as well. But the who I am, the step 1, that's the big picture summary of your career, right? So as opposed to going all the way back in time and talking about your schooling or where you were born or where you grew up or whatever, you're starting with that big picture. And for career changers, this is going to be a great place to confidently and strongly kind of state your career change. And you can do that in a couple of different ways. The focus here should be on who you are professionally, and you do want to keep it fairly concise, short and sweet. The whole answer should be fairly concise. It should be more of a highlights versus in-depth detail, right? So that's why it does take a little bit of effort thinking about the bullet points in advance, because if you try to just kind of wing it, it can go off in so many different tangents. So, so that first big picture summary, let's look at some examples of how you might start, right? So this is someone who's doing a little bit of a career shift. I'm a data scientist with a background in the financial services industry, and I recently earned my certification in machine learning. Right, so this leads with the most relevant. This is who I am professionally, and along with a couple of the highlights of what's new and what's most relevant for you, Mr. Hiring Manager or Ms. Hiring Manager. The second one is a little bit of a broader thing, right? So if you're someone who has a lot of different aspects of experience, and that's the type of role you're looking at, as someone who maybe wears a couple of different hats, this is a place where you could sum that up. I'm an experienced HR executive, and I manage all aspects from X to Y to Z, right? And that's another way of doing it. The third one is the name dropping approach, right? Sometimes if you have, it's very true, it's been proven time and again, companies tend to make a jump to credibility when they hear that you've worked for another company or organization that they respect or that's well known. So sometimes if that's one of your strengths, that's something that you could mention up front, some of the more prestigious companies that you've worked for, so that you're leading with that a bit. So those are just a few examples of that opener, right? So you're giving that big picture overview of who you are, and then from there you will then segue into the rest of it. So here are some bad examples, right? So the first one is that TMI approach, right? Going all the way back. And this one, of course, is exaggerated, but you get the idea. And then the second one is more of that generic, I see this a lot, right? Well, I'm looking for a new role and I'm, interested in a new opportunity. Very generic, not the best way to start, not the best way to make a good impression. Okay, so once you've got that big picture statement out front, you're moving into part 2, right? So this is your highlight reel. This is like 3 or 4 bullet points, and for a lot of people, especially if you've had more of a traditional career building up to where you're going next, this might be a summary of the last couple of positions and what you did, right? So right now I'm working at XYZ doing this and specializing in that. Prior to that I was, so kind of walking through the last few positions. Now, if you don't have experience that's as relevant to the next job, or if you're trying to focus on certain aspects that are more transferable, you don't have to go with that standard last few positions bit, right? You can do other things. You can dive deeper into the most recent or the most relevant stuff, and then maybe tack on at the end. And previously I worked in the financial services field, blah, 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 right? So just to to cap it a little bit. So again, highlight reel. You'll have the opportunity to walk through all of this. They are going to ask you questions about the different jobs on your resume and why you left. All that stuff is going to come up. Here we're talking about focusing, right? Focusing on your biggest selling points that really kind of show who you are and tell your story. Your story leading you to here. Right, and this is just an example of part of this middle section. So keep in mind, we want the overall answer to be in that 1 to 2 minute range, right? So that's, like I said, 3 or 4 bullet points, depending on how detailed they are. And in this case, this applicant has spent the last 6 years in one role. They've been promoted. They've won awards. That's what they're focusing on. Throwing in a little description of one of their big wins in the job, which has some nice statistics and data in there. That's always great. And then they probably went on to talk a little bit more about what they did just prior to that, or maybe some of their other accomplishments, right? So really thinking about, that's why, again, preparing in advance for this, it really helps you distill down what you think are the key things that summarize who you are and why you're qualified, as opposed to trying to, again, wing it and wander your way through and wander into things that aren't as relevant or as interesting. Okay, so just, again, you can summarize the last few positions. You could go deeper into education and certification if those are some of the things that are most relevant in terms of positioning you for this new job, right? You can get into, yeah, I just completed this certification. It was such a great experience because I got a chance to work on all these different projects. We did X hours of instruction, and you can really kind of get into the value of that education or certification. Overview any specific projects that you might have done. And here, if you are making a career change, you could also get into that a little bit, right? Talking a little bit about that decision. I think anytime you're making a career change, if you can, in the tell me about yourself at some point, if you can clearly state, I made the decision to shift my career and focus on this, right? So that it's very clear this is a decision, a strategic decision that's been made, and not just, I'm looking at a lot of different things. I'm seeing what's out there. They want to kind of feel you're committed to making that shift, because this job, they want to make sure you're committed to this job if you were to get it. And then the final part of the tell me about yourself is the why you're here, right? So you end your answer with a concise statement of your interest in the position, a little bit of enthusiasm. This is really helpful because I find that without this, what ends up happening is people end up wandering and I don't know, and should I keep talking? Is there more stuff I should talk about? Is there anything else you want to know about me? And that doesn't feel confident and purposeful, right? So this allows you to end in a sort of a confident, purposeful way, right? And it can be super simple, right? It could be just saying, I'm really excited about this position because I think it's a great fit for me. Or in this example, someone who's already working, I love my current role, but I'm ready for more challenging. So just, I'm excited to be here. This is a role that I'm really interested in. You could give a little more detail than that if you think you have the time and that you can say it concisely, but be assured they will ask follow-up questions. Why this job? Why do you want to work for us? Why do you want to shift to this career versus that career? So you'll have a chance to elaborate on all of this, but I think just ending with a simple statement of your interest can be really powerful. And yeah, you don't want to go negative, right? You don't want to seem like I'm here because I have to find something else, as opposed to I'm here because I'm really excited about the opportunity. Right? And then of course, once you have bullet points sketched out for all three of those parts, you're going to try to combine them into a seamless answer that flows naturally. So like I said, we're not scripting, we're outlining, right? We're writing bullet points about the key topics we want to cover here. And then we're going to practice it out loud. And you might find that what you've written doesn't flow and you need to make some adjustments in terms of order, cutting some stuff out, adding some transitions there. So you can practice it with your notes in front of you first, and the Big Interview Practice Tool lets you practice, delete, record again as many times as you want, and then you can, once you're starting to feel a little bit comfortable with the overall content, you can put your notes away and just practice it off book, as they say. And I guarantee, if you feel like you've got a great approach to this answer, it's going to increase your confidence so much, and it's really going to make a big difference in how your interviews go. When you start strong, it's just a dramatic difference. Okay, so now is your chance, and again, we don't have time to do the whole thing, to try to write down the whole thing, but just want to encourage you, based on what we've been talking about, that three-part model, maybe jot down a few notes related to how you would apply this to your own situation, summarizing your own story and your own experience when answering, tell me about yourself in your next job interview. And while you're thinking about that, I just want to turn to Summer. Any specific questions about this topic? Because if so, we'll address them. If not, we'll scoot through the next section and cover general questions after that.
No, it doesn't look like there's any questions at this time.
Great. Okay, good. Yeah, so I know I'm moving quickly, and the great thing is you can go back and play this again if you missed anything. We are going to make this available as a recording, and again, Big Interview has all of this in more depth if you want to go in and check out our curriculum and our practice tools. Okay, so my number one recommendation, I don't care who you are, work on your tell me about yourself. Number two recommendation, I don't care who you are, work on talking about your strengths in a confident, comfortable, compelling way, right? So we all have heard the cliche, oh, what are your greatest strengths? They're probably going to ask you, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Weakness is another thing, but strengths, I think a lot of people are scared of the weakness question. They prepare for the weakness question. And the strengths thing, people end up just sort of blurting out something kind of bland, and I'm a people person who is great to work with and has a strong work ethic, right? So those are all good things, of course, but this is an opportunity, and you're going to get some question, right? And a lot of times people don't quite make the connection that what are your strengths or what are your greatest strengths. You can use the same answer for that as you would use for why do you think you're a fit? What do you think you would bring to the role? Why should we hire you, right? Why would you be good at this job? They're going to ask some form of this, right? It just kind of depends on the wording. That's really what the interview is all about. The whole interview is about, let me find out what it is about this person that makes them stand out from all the other people, right? If we wouldn't have called them in for an interview if we didn't think they have at least the bare minimum qualifications. So what makes this person stand out, right? So you have got to be prepared to talk about that in a compelling way, in a comfortable way, and it's hard. It is hard for most of us. Most of us have been conditioned to not brag about ourselves. We don't get practice talking about ourselves in this sort of positive way in most other settings in our life. So it feels weird. And if you haven't prepared for it, a lot of times what happens is you blurt out something awkward, or you just hold back, or you end up being self-deprecating. And again, I see this every single day with my coaching clients, and even senior level, extremely accomplished coaching clients who are just maybe more modest by nature and end up not taking full advantage of this question, these types of questions. And I think with a little bit of time, a little bit of prep, you can really stand out with these types of questions, and it can really be the thing that takes you to the next stage. Right, so let's talk about how to do that. I've already kind of jumped ahead to the stuff on this slide, right? You know, choosing lame strengths, falling back on modesty, right? All of these are things that cause people to not make the most of this opportunity, and it is an opportunity. All right, so here's what I suggest that you do. This is what I tell my coaching clients to do, right? Is to basically Sit down when you're not in an interview, when you're not under the gun, under pressure, and just force yourself to make a list of at least 5 good strengths, at least 5 strengths. And don't censor yourself too much at the beginning. You know, open it up, brainstorm, write down whatever comes to mind. And then for each of the ones that you end up looking at and feeling like, yeah, this is a good strength. This is something that I think is true about me. For each of those, you want to have a concise proof point. For each of those, right? So instead of just listing a laundry list of strengths, you have a proof point for each of those. So we'll look at some examples in a moment, right? So instead of just listing things, you're talking a little bit about how you individually demonstrate that strength. And that's a great way to help them see who you are, sort of picture you in action, and feel like they're getting to know you, not only professionally, but a little bit about your values and what makes you different. So you don't want to be too generic. I always say, could 90% of your friends claim your strength? Go with something else, right? Or maybe the truth is that a lot of jobs do ask for similar strengths. You know, being a hard worker, being a great communicator, being a good team player. These are all things that a lot of jobs want. So it's okay if one of your strengths is something common. It's just that you have to use that proof point and the way you word it to stand out, to help you stand out and show that you really do exhibit that strength. And avoid weak praise. I see this a lot. People are so uncomfortable with this idea that they end up being like, well, I'm pretty pleasant to work with and I kind of get along with everybody. And I'm like, yes, but what about, you know, these awards and this incredible, you know, accomplishment that you had as a top salesperson at the company? So just try to get past that modesty to keep that weak praise and really force yourself. And again, I know this might feel weird. That's why we're writing it down first, forcing ourselves out of the comfort zone. And then you can make adjustments, right? You don't have to be someone that you're not. You can make sure that it's in your voice and figure out how to phrase it or adjust it once you feel like you've settled on those 3 best strengths, which that's what our recommendation is, that you're basically going to have time for maybe 3 strengths, or maybe some people will go with 2 really strong ones that have more in-depth proof points to them. But you're going to pick your top 3. And I tell people to brainstorm at least 5 because I think it's great to have a spare or 2 that you can fall back on. And those also help you a lot when it comes to other questions, right? Just being comfortable talking about more than 3 strengths is a great thing. So if the topic comes up, even if you decided, let's say, that creativity isn't one of your top 3, but then the person asks about, oh, tell me about one of your creative experiences or, you know, something related to that, then you've got the wording. You've already prepared to talk about that a little bit. So if you get stuck, these are some things that you can do, right? Ask for feedback, look for common themes in your accomplishments in your resume. I'm a fan of the Strengths Finder assessment. That can be useful for people. So just some ideas if you're struggling with this one. And here's an example. So I mentioned that a lot of people talk about their work ethic and being a hard worker, which is 100% true, but it's okay. Most jobs would love to have someone who has a strong work ethic. So as long as you make it your own, like this person did, right? Strong work ethic. And you see, when I commit to a deadline, I do whatever it takes, for example, right? So you could use a single example as your proof point, or you could do something more general, right? Throughout my career, I've always been the one who's the first in the morning and the last to leave at night. I'm always volunteering to help people. It could be a little bit more in general, but having a nice little, for example, recently can help to really add some detail there. And so again, you should have at least 3 to 5 prepared. You won't tell them all in every interview, but it's good to have some spares. And this is also a good jumping off point for developing your behavioral stories, your example stories, which if you haven't done that yet, if you haven't thought about behavioral questions yet, check out our lessons on Big Interview, because it's more than we can get into in our time remaining, but it's also another important part of the interview process. So I highly encourage you to check out the lessons on behavioral questions and also our behavioral interview sets, because behavioral questions, those tell me about a time questions, have become a huge part of most companies' interview processes. Okay, and these are some other places where you can use those strengths that you've prepared. I'm zipping through a little bit because I want to make sure that we leave a little bit of time for questions, and I know we're coming up almost to the end of our hour together. But if you can, while it's fresh in your mind, while we've been talking about strengths and looking at examples, take a moment, jot down some ideas. Maybe these are things that you've already, maybe if you've had some interviews recently, you've got some that are your go-tos. Maybe you can expand upon those with some better proof points or additional proof points. Maybe brainstorm a couple of other ideas for strengths that you might want to highlight. And this is also a good place for me to pause and see any questions on, I know I covered things a little bit quickly, but any burning questions on tell me about yourself or strengths that we should talk about. And I guess at this point, let me just open it up to all questions since we do have about 5 minutes left, and give people an opportunity to ask what's on their mind.
So there's a question that came through, and it's going to kind of talk about the opposite of the strengths. And the question is, what's the best way to answer your greatest weakness?
Yes, that's definitely a big one. And again, we have lessons on that and examples on that. But the big takeaway for people on weakness, and I have to say this is one of the things that I would say pretty much every coaching client that I work with wants to talk about, because it's still very common. It's kind of an old school question. It's kind of cliche, but it's still asked pretty often. And it's hard, right? Because you want to find that balance between coming across as truthful and candid and real, right? And answering the question. But you also don't want to say anything that could raise a red flag or could make them perceive you in a way that you don't want to be perceived. So it's a little bit tough. My recommendation is always to think about it from the perspective of choosing a real weakness, right? You want to have something prepared, because if you get this question, you want to be prepared for it. And if you don't get it, great, just be relieved. You were over prepared, but at least you didn't have to stress out about it. So have something prepared, a actual weakness, right? But make sure you really think about it and pick something that's not a huge red flag for the job. And we have some common some examples of some common ones that can be used in different industries on in our lesson on this question. But the idea is to just sort of talk in a neutral way about the weakness, and then the key here is then to talk about, here's how I've already been working on this. Here's how I'm already improving. Because the goal of this question is for them to get a sense of, okay, this person seems great. They're talking about all positive things, but what happens if I try to really push them for something a little bit negative? Do they seem like they're being honest? Do they seem like they're hiding something? So you want to come across as open. And then at the same time, you also want to come across as someone who is driven to improve. Someone who sees a weakness and jumps right on it, as opposed to, yeah, so I got a weakness and I guess that's life, right? So you always want to have something in there about how you've already been improving, already been building on that weakness to improve yourself. Okay. Great, and we just have a couple more minutes. Other questions? Anybody else have other questions on your mind?
Looks like we had one more come through. And this question is, what can I do to be less nervous in interviews?
Oh, good. This is a good one, right? So to be less nervous in interviews, well, first of all, it's good to be a little bit nervous, right? So don't feel like you have to be calm, cool, and collected 100%, because if you're excited about the job, it makes sense to be a little bit nervous, and your performance might even be a little bit better with a little bit of that adrenaline. But I have to say, it may be not, what people want to hear, but preparation and practice, it really, really is the way to manage those nerves. And even if you're someone who's very introverted or who gets really, really self-conscious in interviews, it can help so much to have gone through the preparation, really thinking about, especially for the tricky questions or that you perceive as tricky, having walked through them, really thought about them, ideally sort of bulleted out kind of your general approach, your general speaking points for them, and then practicing, especially if you're not used to talking about yourself this way, practicing. That's why the big interview practice tool is so useful. Some people don't like recording themselves. I know it's not maybe your number one idea of a fun Saturday night to sit home and record yourself answering interview questions, but the process of practicing, it really does help you get that comfort level. Not to say you're going to walk in 100% every time feeling like I'm the best, but you will walk in knowing I've prepared, I've practiced, and I'm ready. And that's knowing that you've done everything you can do goes a long way to helping you feel like you're ready for that interview. And there are other things that you can do in terms of breathing exercises, but I think the number one thing that I've seen with my coaching clients has been just doing the work, doing the homework of being prepared. All right, well, I know we're right at the end, and I just want to make sure I reiterate for all of you. Well, first of all, thank you for being here. Thanks for participating. We covered a lot, and I do just want to direct you for next steps to go to Big Interview. We have a whole curriculum on the resume piece of it. We have a whole curriculum on all the common interview questions, the practice tools. We've got practice sets for every industry out there. So please do continue with your preparation process using Big Interview, and you can always reach out to us with questions that come up. And yeah, hopefully we will be back to do another webinar at some point down the road. So before we wrap up, any last questions from anyone before we end for today?
It doesn't look like we have any others at this time.
Okay, great. All right, well, thanks again for attending, and good luck in your job search. Hopefully you will go in there, take advantage of Big Interview, and let us know how it goes. Have a great day.